For decades, Willie Nelson carried a secret that weighed heavily on him every single day. When Kris Kristofferson passed away, Willie could no longer keep silent. He admitted that Kris wasn't just his friend or bandmate, he was the reason Willie survived the darkest years of his life. But the truth came with a devastating twist. Willie waited until after Kris had died to finally say it out loud. In his own words, he despised himself for never confessing it while Kris was alive. What Willie revealed about those desperate nights was heartbreaking. Some secrets, he realized, are far too heavy to carry alone. Willie Nelson was born on April 29, 1933, in Abbott, Texas, a tiny town of only about 300 people. His arrival came during the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis in American history, when 1 out of every 4 people didn't have a job. In the middle of this struggle, Willie's mother left. He was just 6 months old when she walked out to look for work, and she never returned. Soon after, his father also left. Willie and his sister Bobby were abandoned and left in the care of their grandparents, Nancy and Alfred. Nancy was a piano teacher, while Alfred worked as a blacksmith. The family owned almost nothing. Winters were so harsh that they glued newspapers to the walls to block the freezing wind. Willie grew up in a world that seemed to be falling apart, surrounded by hunger and heartbreak. By the age of 7, Willie was already picking cotton in the Texas heat after school just to help buy food. That same year, he nearly lost his life to pneumonia, a sickness that was killing countless children at the time. Medical care was limited and thousands of kids died every year. Willie survived, but the illness left behind something permanent, a toughness that carried him through the hardest years of his life. Around that same period, something else happened that would change him forever. At 6 years old, his grandfather gave him a guitar. It was a cheap one, all they could afford, but the moment Willie touched it, he felt a spark. By the age of 7, he was already writing songs. His first was likely a little gospel tune, something simple, not pretty paper, which came decades later in 1963. Even as a child, music became his way of surviving. By 10 years old, Willie was playing in local bars, earning more money than most adults who picked cotton. This boy in dusty overalls was becoming a musical prodigy, yet his home life was far from free. His grandmother was deeply religious and attended the Methodist church that had stood in Abbott since 1899. She believed dancing was a sin and didn't allow it. Every Sunday, Willie sang in the choir, presenting himself as the perfect church boy. But in secret, he was drinking beer and smoking cigarettes, terrified that his sins would send him to hell. While his grandmother prayed, Willie tuned into the radio, listening to Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys, the very music she would have condemned as devil's work. In a poetic twist of fate, years later, Willie bought that same church to keep it from closing down. But even before all of that, tragedy struck. In 1939, when Willie was just 6 years old, his grandfather Alfred died of pneumonia. Alfred was the man who had raised him, taught him to play guitar, and loved him like a father. Willie later said losing him felt like losing the son. After Alfred's death, life became even harder. Willie had to milk cows every morning before school and work long hours to help the family survive. That loss lit a fire inside him, shaping his stubbornness, his independence, and his outlaw spirit. At 17, fresh out of high school in 1950, Willie joined the U.S. Air Force with the dream of serving his country. But the dream ended quickly. Just 9 months in, his back gave out while lifting heavy equipment. The injury was so severe that the military discharged him. Suddenly, with no money and no direction, Willie turned back to the one thing that never failed him: music. In 1956, he moved to Vancouver, Washington, where he took a job as a radio DJ at KVN. There, he recorded his very first single, "No Place for Me," with a song called "Lumberjack" on the other side. Willie even created his own label, Willie Nelson Records, and sold the records himself, bundled with autographed photos for $1 each. Starday Records refused to release his music, but that didn't stop him. Using only his voice on the airwaves, Willie managed to sell 3,000 copies through his radio show. Despite this small success, money was still scarce. He worked late nights, washed dishes, and even auditioned for the popular program Ozark Jubilee, only to be turned down. Eventually, he gave up and returned to Texas, where he sold Bibles and vacuum cleaners just to feed his family. At one point, he even became a sales manager for Encyclopedia Americana. Life was brutal, but the pain seeped into his music, giving it soul and weight. In Fort Worth, he began playing in honky-tonk bars, wild places filled with noise, smoke, and constant fights. Willie needed protection just to get through a night. That's when he hired Paul English, a drummer with a devilish goatee and a reputation for carrying guns. Paul played music but also acted as muscle, making sure no one messed with Willie. Fights still broke out, especially when drunk strangers tried to control his songs, and sometimes Willie himself had to throw punches. But those nights taught him how to command a crowd and survive the music business. By 1959, things reached a breaking point. Willie was broke and facing eviction. In desperation, he sold one of his songs, Family Bible, for just $50. The song went on to become a massive hit for another artist. Around that same time, he also sold Nightlife for only $150. These choices broke his heart, but they pushed him onto the path that would eventually make him a legend. Both songs brought in huge amounts of money, but not for him. Through that disappointment, he learned a hard truth: always own your songs. That lesson would later become the foundation of his wealth. By 1960, he moved to Nashville. Nearly 30 years old, cold, broke, and sleeping in his car, he reached his lowest point. One snowy night, he laid down in the snow and waited to die, until a friend found him just in time. Not long after, songwriter Harlan Howard heard his music at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge and convinced Pamper Music to hire Willie for $50 a week. That tiny paycheck saved his life. In 1961, he wrote Crazy for Patsy Cline. At first, she hated hearing his songs because her husband played them endlessly. But when she finally listened to Crazy, everything changed. The song became her biggest hit and a crossover sensation. Willie, however, earned little from it, as record labels took most of the profits. That betrayal left him bitter toward the Nashville system, and he began pulling away. A year later, in 1962, he released his first album, And Then I Wrote, featuring classics like Crazy and Funny How Time Slips Away. People loved the songs, but not when Willie sang them. With sales failing, he went back to selling Bibles just to survive, watching everyone else grow rich from his music while he stayed broke. Liberty Records offered another chance in 1962 with Touch Me, which climbed to number. But his journey to that moment had started years earlier. After RCA dropped him in 1972, he left Nashville behind and returned to Texas. There, he discovered Austin's strange, free-spirited music scene of hippies, cowboys, and outlaws. At the Armadillo World headquarters, he fit right in. In 1973, sitting in a New York hotel bathroom, he scribbled the lyrics to Shotgun Willie on a sanitary pad box. The crude beginning became a turning point. The album only reached number 41 nationally, but in Austin, it outsold everything he had ever made, igniting the outlaw country movement. By 1975, he shocked critics again with Red-Headed Stranger. Recorded in a small Texas studio for just $4,000, the label hated it, dismissing it as demo quality. Willie refused to change a thing. Released exactly as he envisioned, the album went multi-platinum. His rendition of Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain became his first #1 hit and won him a Grammy, ending a 13-year drought without a top 10 single. He had proved that raw honesty could defeat Nashville polish. The momentum only grew. In 1976, Willie and Waylon Jennings recorded Wanted, The Outlaws, a mix of old and new songs. Nobody expected much, yet it became the first country album to sell 1 million copies, even breaking into the pop charts. Nashville was forced to take the outlaw movement seriously, but Willie's outlaw image had consequences. In 1977, he was arrested in the Bahamas for marijuana possession. A friend brought him beer in jail, and Willie even injured himself celebrating his release. Though the charges were dropped, he was banned from the Bahamas for life, a ban that remains to this day. Health troubles soon followed. In 1981, while swimming in Hawaii, his lung collapsed, the result of years of smoking 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes daily. He canceled 18 shows, losing nearly $900,000. He quit tobacco, though he continued with marijuana and later switched to vaporizers to save what was left of his lungs. In 1984, After filming Johnny Cash's Christmas special in Switzerland, Willie, Cash, Waylon Jennings, and Kris Kristofferson began jamming together. By the time they returned home, they had formed a band, the Highwaymen. Their debut album, Highwayman, went platinum in 1985, bringing together legends who felt pushed aside by modern radio. Not everyone welcomed the name, an older folk group even sued, but the lawsuit failed. The country legends carried on. Then, disaster struck. In 1990, the IRS announced that Willie owed $32 million in back taxes, one of music's worst financial collapses. His accounting firm, Price Waterhouse, had funneled his money into illegal tax shelters. The IRS seized nearly everything: his ranch, studio, gold records, and even his piano. Only his guitar, Trigger, escaped thanks to his daughter, who hid it in Hawaii. Friends bought back many possessions at auction and rented them to him. But Willie was left broke and humiliated. To fight back, he came up with something unheard of: an album made solely to repay the IRS. The IRS tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories, featured nothing but Willie and his guitar, with every sale going directly to cover his debt. It didn't erase the full amount, but it made history and kept him afloat. Yet more struggles lay ahead. In 1994, police found him asleep in his Mercedes on a Texas highway, a marijuana joint in the ashtray. Arrested again, Willie chose not to hide. Instead, he became an outspoken advocate for marijuana reform, turning his arrest into a cause. But even as he tried to transform his public battles into purpose, personal heartbreak cut deeper. On Christmas Day in 1991, his son Billy died by suicide, leaving a wound that would never fully heal. Billy was only 33. Just a day earlier, he had bought new clothes and gotten a fresh haircut, but he had been struggling with depression. At the same time, Willie was on tour, battling an IRS nightmare, and the loss of Billy nearly broke him. He later admitted those were the darkest days of his life. His family had already been torn apart. His third wife, Connie, discovered he had fathered a child with another woman after she found a hospital bill. Their marriage ended in divorce in 1988. By 1991, Willie had married Annie D'Angelo, his fourth wife. Looking back, he admitted he had a knack for making life more complicated than it had to be. Even his charity work didn't escape controversy. In 1985, Willie had co-founded Farm Aid to support struggling family farmers, raising $12 million in just 3 years. Yet during his tax crisis, critics accused him of using the charity for tax breaks. By 1995, Willie himself acknowledged that most of the funds had gone to farmers who were already losing their land. The system was broken, and he couldn't fix it. Still, he never stopped making music. At 65, he released an album unlike anything he had ever done before. It was called Teatro, and it was released on September 1st, 1998. Unlike most artists, Willie didn't record it in a studio. Instead, he chose an old movie theater in Oxnard, California. That unusual decision gave the album a haunting quality. Stripped down, filled with drums and atmosphere. Emmylou Harris sang in the background, adding a dreamy, raw texture. Willie even revisited songs he had written in the 1960s, like Darkness on the Face of the Earth and My Own Peculiar Way, breathing new life into them. The sessions were so unusual that filmmaker Wim Wenders made a documentary about them. The album didn't win any Grammys, but it proved something more important. Willie Nelson wasn't afraid. Not of aging, not of change, and not of breaking every rule in country music. When Teatro was reissued in 2017 with 7 new songs, people realized how well it had stood the test of time. Then in 2008, Willie shocked fans again. On June 14th, at 75 years old, he appeared on a song with Snoop Dogg. The track, My Medicine, blended country and rap. Produced by Everlast, its music video went viral. Seeing the red-headed stranger rap alongside a West Coast legend was more than surprising. It sparked a conversation. Some older country fans were furious, unwilling to see their clean-cut hero associated with explicit lyrics. But younger fans loved it. The collaboration reached number 39 on the Dutch charts and made one thing crystal clear. Willie Nelson didn't care about staying in the box. He cared about staying real. Still, behind the music, Willie Nelson was a man in danger of destroying himself. By the time he met Annie D'Angelo, he was already a legend. But he was also falling apart. His drinking had become destructive. To the world, he was still the smiling outlaw, but inside, he was crumbling. When they married in 1991, everything began to change. Annie was more than his wife. She became the one person who could save him from himself. She had first met him years earlier on a film set, working as a makeup artist. By the time they married, she understood the pain he carried and how close he was to losing it all. She gave him an ultimatum: no more drinking. No more excuses. In a 2024 interview, she repeated the family rule she had made for him. Don't be a goddamn asshole. Willie listened. He gave up drinking and smoking, turning instead to cannabis, which he said made him feel alive again. For the first time in years, he actually looked forward to performing. Together with Annie, he raised two sons, Lucas and Micah, who would follow in his footsteps as musicians. Today, both tour alongside their father, carrying his music into the future. In 2022, a frightening chapter unfolded. At 89 years old, Willie contracted COVID-19 and the illness struck him hard. On his tour bus in Nashville, he began struggling to breathe. Annie refused to panic. Back at their Texas ranch, she transformed their home into a full-scale emergency hospital, administering nebulizer treatments, Paxlovid, monoclonal antibodies, and steroids. At one point, she feared he wouldn't make it. Willie later admitted that the ordeal was rough, saying COVID was no joke, and acknowledging the toll it took on his mental health. During the pandemic, he also lost many of his oldest friends, including Merle Haggard, whose lungs had been ruined by years of smoking. Few expected Willie to survive. Yet only 3 weeks later, he walked back on stage. The audience was stunned, but he wasn't finished. In 2024, another scare rattled his fans. At 91, Willie was forced to cancel 7 shows on the Outlaw Music Festival tour. Fears of the worst spread quickly, fueled by online rumors and fake photos showing him in a hospital bed. One false claim even alleged that his son Lucas had revealed he was in serious condition. The truth was simpler. Willie was exhausted. Years of relentless touring had worn him down, and his emphysema was acting up. Still, in true Willie fashion, he bounced back within days, returning to the stage at his 4th of July picnic in New Jersey. Asked about his health, he shrugged it off, saying, "I'm 91 plus. I don't hurt anywhere. I don't feel bad. I'm not worried about dying." Long before those struggles back in the 1960s, Willie met a man who would profoundly shape his life: Kris Kristofferson. Both outsiders in Nashville, they were fighting to break through with songs that didn't sound like anyone else's. Kris had once been a Rhodes Scholar and Army captain before giving it all up for music, and Willie recognized something rare in him. In 1971, Willie performed Me and Bobby McGee, one of Kris's songs, a moment that helped spark the outlaw country movement. Years later, in 1979, Willie recorded an album made almost entirely of Kristofferson's work, saying that Kris had given him the courage to be different. In 1984, the two collaborated on the film Songwriter, playing versions of themselves, two legends struggling against the music industry. Much of the dialogue was improvised, often while high, with the two feeding off each other's energy. The movie mirrored the hardships they had truly lived. Willie himself had once sold his song Nightlife for just $150, a tune that later sold more than 30 million copies and was recorded by over 70 artists. The film captured stories like that. Kris even earned an Oscar nomination for the music he contributed. The following year brought Farm Aid. In 1985, the inaugural concert drew 80,000 people, with Willie and Kris standing side by side on stage. Kris performed They Killed Him, a tribute to figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Over the years, the two often shared Farm Aid stages. Though they rarely agreed politically, Kris leaned left, Willie leaned libertarian. Their arguments were frequent, but their friendship endured because of mutual respect. In 2024, after Kris passed away, Willie honored him by singing "Help Me Make It Through the Night," leaving the entire crowd in tears. Kris's decline had begun years earlier. In 2009, he started losing his memory so severely that he often couldn't recall what he was doing from one moment to the next. Doctors suspected dementia or damage from boxing, and for years he withdrew from public life. Finally, in 2016, a test revealed the true cause: Lyme disease. With proper treatment, Kris began to improve in just 3 weeks. Throughout it all, Willie stood by him, visiting him in Hawaii and remaining a steadfast friend, even when Kris couldn't remember his own songs. When Kris Kristofferson died on September 28, 2024, something broke inside Willie. Weeks later, in a quiet interview with the Associated Press, he finally voiced what he had always believed, that Kris was the greatest songwriter alive. He admitted it even though Kris was gone, perhaps wishing he had said it sooner. He told the world that Kris left behind songs people would sing for generations. The words carried the weight of regret. After 6 decades in music, Willie still had things he wished he had spoken out loud. Willie's grief was evident. In that same interview, he confessed simply, "I hated to lose him." For a man who had survived so much, those few words hit fans hard. He had already buried 2 other highwaymen, Waylon Jennings in 2002 and Johnny Cash in 2003. Now he was the last one left. The supergroup they had formed in 1985 had dominated country music for a decade, with their debut album reaching #1. But with Kris gone, Willie was truly alone. The burden wasn't just losing a friend, it was the heavy weight of being the last survivor. Later that year, Willie revealed something even more surprising. He admitted that Kris Kristofferson's songs had saved his career in his darkest moments, something he had never shared while Kris was alive. He pointed to Sunday Morning Coming Down, the song that won a Grammy after Johnny Cash recorded it in 1970. Willie said that song had pulled him out of darkness more than once. Kristofferson's words, he explained, had been a lifeline. He also mentioned Me and Bobby McGee for the Good